I have always felt that tariffs are their own punishment, and I still don't understand why Americans want to punish the consumers of aluminum when you get 60% of it from Canada.
Those 25% auto tariffs went into effect at midnight on all Canadian-made vehicles.
If we don't make a deal with Canada, we're going to put a big tariff on cars, could be a 50 or 100%, because we don't want their cars.
Basically, every single new car in America is going to see a price increase.
$7,500. That's how much more a $30,000 Canadian-made car now costs to sell in the United States just because of one tariff. Not because the vehicle changed, not because the parts got more expensive, but because the U.S. government slapped a 25% auto tariff on everything made across the border in Ontario. And the fallout. It was immediate. 500 workers laid off. A major assembly plant shut down without a restart date. Billions in investment frozen or canceled. What was once a tightly integrated supply chain crossing the border half a dozen times per vehicle was suddenly shattered. No warning, no transition period, just a midnight policy shift that turned North America's most efficient trade corridor into a battleground. The border didn't move, but it changed, from invisible to brutal, from seamless to weaponized. And for thousands of families in Windsor, Ontario and Detroit, Michigan, the impact wasn't theoretical, it was personal.
We are still talking money, power, politics. Automakers Ford and Hyundai saw their sales go up in May on strong SUV and truck demand. But tariffs, they are still looming over the industry. And Barron's is reporting that despite strong sales, the pain is coming.
The 25% tariff didn't just disrupt trade, it detonated the foundation of the North American auto industry. For years, the border between Ontario and Michigan wasn't a barrier. It was a bridge, a functional blur. Vehicle components crossed it freely, sometimes 6 or more times, as part of a tightly choreographed ballet of modern manufacturing. A transmission might begin in Indiana, get machined in Ontario, pick up gears in Michigan, then head to Mexico for final assembly before returning to Canada for integration. This loop wasn't accidental. It was designed to maximize efficiency and minimize cost. And it worked, until it didn't. When the U.S. tariffs on Canadian-made vehicles took effect at midnight, everything changed overnight. Shipments stalled, border crossings clogged, entire assembly lines froze in place, not because they lacked parts, but because the parts were stuck in paperwork limbo. Suddenly, automakers were hit with a new kind of uncertainty. Parts that used to arrive just in time were now arriving just in case if they arrived at all. And every crossing came with a question: would the paperwork be accepted? Would the shipment be flagged? Would the tariffs apply to a partially assembled component or a finished one? Even the experts didn't always agree. Customs officials were overwhelmed. Classification rules were vague, and no one knew how to price a dashboard that was half installed and half in transit. By the end of the first month, the impact was visible. General Motors paused production at its Cami plant. Honda shelved its expansion plans. Stalantis shut down Windsor assembly temporarily, a pause that stretched into months. Warehouses filled up. Trucks idled for hours. Production lines that once hummed with precision now echoed with silence. What had once been North America's most efficient industrial system, a seamless, borderless supply chain, was now a minefield. And in a world where manufacturing depends on predictability, the entire model began to unravel. This wasn't just a trade policy. It was a redefinition of the rules without a playbook, without a warning, and without a safety net for the people who built their lives around a system that suddenly no longer existed. Windsor, Ontario, once known as the beating heart of Canada's auto sector, became the first to fall. When Stalantis halted operations at its Windsor assembly plant, 500 workers were sent home. At first, the company called it a 2-week adjustment. That was months ago. The plant is still silent. There is no restart date, no guarantees, just a parking lot full of weeds and uncertainty. But the damage didn't stop at the factory gates. It spread fast and quietly. The late-night diners that once served second-shift machinists shut their doors. Daycare centers closed as working parents stopped showing up. Public services from libraries to bus routes faced cutbacks as the city braced for a multi-million-dollar shortfall in tax revenue. Windsor wasn't hit by a storm or a strike. It was hit by a spreadsheet decision 600 miles away, a tariff that added 25% to the cost of every Canadian-made vehicle destined for the U.S. market. That markup, roughly $7,500 per car, was too steep for buyers, too heavy for manufacturers, and too fast for communities to absorb. So, business leaders faced an impossible choice: absorb the cost, pass it to the consumer, or move production. None of those options worked. All of them meant pain. Apprenticeship programs dried up. Capital investment froze. Plans for electric vehicle expansion, once held up as Windsor's future, were shelved indefinitely. Across the city, conversations changed. From what's next to, should we leave? From how do we grow to, can we survive? At Windsor Regional Hospital, administrators prepared for a wave of newly uninsured patients as laid-off workers lost health coverage. At local high schools, guidance counselors fielded questions from students who once aimed for college and were now asking if they should just look for factory jobs if any still existed. The collapse wasn't abstract. It was visible, tangible, and personal. What started as a policy decision in Washington has turned into a daily crisis around Ontario's kitchen tables. And the question echoing through Windsor and cities just like it isn't. When will things go back to normal? It's what if this is the new normal? The average car contains over 30,000 individual parts, from sensors to screws, bumpers to brake lines. And in North America, most of those parts cross the US-Canada border multiple times before the vehicle is ever sold. Before the tariffs, this system was considered a modern miracle. Just-in-time manufacturing kept costs low, waste minimal, and production lines humming. Parts arrived exactly when needed, sometimes just hours before installation. But now, that same system has turned against itself. With a 25% tariff applied at every crossing, each piece of that vehicle now adds cost instead of value. A transmission that used to glide across the continent now hemorrhages dollars at every checkpoint. Border bureaucracy has replaced efficiency. In Ontario, the fallout has been immediate. Warehouses are operating at 95% capacity, some turning away shipments entirely. Emergency air freight costs have surged by 40% as manufacturers scramble to avoid line shutdowns. Truck delays at border crossings have doubled, with customs agents buried under new documentation rules. One misfiled form and a $2 million shipment sits idle for days. The cost of failure immediate. And small suppliers, the machine shops, the welders, the plastics fabricators are feeling it first. Analysts now estimate that 20% to 30% of Ontario's small and mid-size auto parts companies won't survive another 6 months under current conditions. They're too specialized to pivot, too integrated to scale back, too dependent on speed to survive slowdown. And yet the system they supported is now working against them. One logistics director put it simply, "We built this industry for just in time. Now it feels like just in case." Companies are hoarding parts, duplicating supply chains, stockpiling inventory just to avoid the next delay. The model that once defined North American competitiveness has become a liability. And the deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. This isn't a temporary disruption. It's a systemic fracture in strategy, in logistics, and in trust. For the Kovich family, the crisis didn't start on the news. It started at the kitchen table. Just 3 days after Daniel Kovich was laid off from the auto parts plant in Windsor, the table where his family once planned vacations and university dreams turned into a command center of damage control. Unopened bills stacked next to a calculator. A university acceptance letter sat untouched. Healthcare coverage was set to expire in 30 days. And they weren't alone. Across Ontario, thousands of families found themselves in the same quiet panic, not because of bad choices, but because of a good job that vanished overnight. Mental health clinics reported a 40% surge in appointment requests in the weeks following mass layoffs. At Windsor Regional Hospital, administrators prepared for a rise in uninsured patients delaying treatment. Food banks across the region, once a safety net, are now operating at double capacity. And then came the schools. As families began relocating or simply stopped enrolling their kids, school districts projected a 7% drop in enrollment for the next academic year. Classrooms consolidated. Programs were cut. Entire communities once anchored by stable incomes began to fray. But this isn't just about lost wages, it's about lost identity. In towns like Windsor and Sarnia, factory work wasn't just a job. It was a legacy, a rhythm, passed down from one generation to the next. Now that rhythm is broken. Parents who once promised to pay for their kids' degrees are telling them to defer. Teenagers are asking if factory work might be safer than university. And in homes across Ontario, what was once confidence has turned into calculation. Which bill can wait? How long will the severance last? Should we move or stay and hope these aren't headlines? There were household decisions reshaped by policy shocks made far away. What's unfolding isn't just an economic collapse. It's an emotional reckoning where stability turns to survival, and the middle class stares down a future it didn't see coming. The layoffs didn't end at the factory gates. They spread fast and quietly. At Crown Logistics 1, in 5 trucks is parked, drivers laid off, routes canceled. At Eastwood Mall, foot traffic is down 25% and retail hours are shrinking fast. Why? Because when factories fall silent, paychecks stop. And when paychecks stop, entire communities slow down. In auto-dependent neighborhoods, unemployment claims are up 37%. Banks are watching mortgages closely. Defaults haven't surged yet, but the warning signs are flashing. This isn't just about jobs. Each factory job lost takes down up to 7 more: the mechanic, the grocer, the daycare worker. Property taxes fall, city budgets shrink, public services get cut, and the quiet, invisible infrastructure that kept these towns running? It's coming undone. One missed shift, one closed shop at a time. The collapse was real, but so is the pivot. Across Ontario, old factories are being repurposed. Advanced manufacturing, once tied to auto parts, is now shifting to aerospace, medical devices, and clean tech. The big driver: electric vehicles. Ontario has already attracted $44 billion in EV-related investment: battery plants, R&D centers, supply chain hubs. Why? Because battery cells and chip components face fewer tariffs than finished cars. It's not about building the whole vehicle anymore. It's about mastering the parts that matter most. Ontario may not return to mass production, but it's now positioning itself as North America's post-tariff innovation zone: leaner, smarter, and harder to replace. As factories slowed, classrooms lit up. Ontario's colleges are pivoting hard toward automation, robotics, and EV battery systems. Training that once took years is now offered as micro-credentials, crash courses, and remote modules. Thousands of displaced workers are re-enrolling: welders, becoming coders, technicians, learning AI. Colleges aren't waiting. They're partnering directly with manufacturers to rebuild the talent pipeline in real time. In this crisis, education isn't just a ladder, it's a shock absorber, one that may decide whether Ontario rebounds or falls further behind. With legacy jobs vanishing, some workers aren't waiting. They're rebuilding from the ground up. Cooperatives, micro-manufacturing, and circular economy startups are taking root. One group of laid-off engineers is now designing waste-sorting robots for mid-sized cities. Another is prototyping modular farm tools for small agriculture. The old model: scale at all costs, is fading. In its place, resilience, flexibility, and local control. Ontario may lose 12,000 to 40,000 auto jobs permanently. But in that loss, a new identity is forming, not just as a builder of cars, but as a builder of what's next. One tariff, one factory shut down, thousands of lives upended. But this wasn't just a trade decision. It was a stress test for supply chains, for communities, for the entire model Ontario was built on. Now the region stands at a crossroads. Was this the beginning of Ontario's decline, or the moment it rewrote its future? That answer won't come from policy memos. It will come from factories, classrooms, and kitchen tables, one reinvention at a time. What do you think? Is this collapse temporary or transformational? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because behind every headline, there's a bigger story.